We really appreciate you taking part of your Saturday morning to spend with us and hear this very excellent program. My name is Pam Marino. I am one of several on the leadership team for Women for Kansas Cali. We have our other three members, Jan Drennan, waving over here, Joan Warren, and Tracy Muller. We appreciate them being here too. Also, I see Representative Ed Trimmer in the audience. We appreciate him coming. And we have several candidates. Don Shimkus was running for Senate 32 district. We have Michelle Schultz here from Caldwell, District 80, House seat. Anyone else that maybe I've missed? Well, we appreciate everyone coming. We've been scrolling two slides before the program, and this is Women for Kansas mission statement and core values. We have given you a little business card. It does have that information on them too. One thing too, we always like to point out that Women for Kansas is nonpartisan, as is all of our state chapters. We have 11. We are one of 11 different groups throughout the state. And all political parties are welcome and represented. We focus on moderate values that are shared across party lines. I'm going to just read a quick bio for our wonderful speaker, Dr. Beth Clarkson here from Wichita State. She's a statistician, and I think you've probably read about her in multiple articles. And on the back also is a little bit more information. We did run a press release recently in the Career Traveler. Dr. Beth Clarkson, Wichita State statistician and founder of ShowMeTheVotes.org, holds a PhD in statistics from Wichita State University, has 3 decades of experience as a statistician helping manufacturing and service industries through the use of quality improvement techniques, surveys, and statistical analysis of data. She specializes in computing material properties, engineering design basis values, quality improvement, statistical graphics, and basic statistical analysis for research purposes, which of course she has been doing on election integrity. She has also developed and taught classes in statistics, mathematics, statistical process control, computation of basic values, and equivalency testing for universities and corporations. And we are very happy to have her here. A couple of months ago, a few of our executive members learned that she was doing a presentation in Wichita at the public library, and we went, and we were so engaged with the information that we asked her to come down here to Winfield to share with all of us. So if you would, please give Dr. Beth Clarkson a really good welcome. And the title of her presentation, Investigating Election Integrity.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and to share what I've found, because I do find it concerning, and I am working to try and improve things, and I hope that you will be inspired to do so as well. So this is my presentation. Let me see. Thank you. Basically, I've been looking into how trustworthy are our electronic voting systems. Do you use electronic voting machines here? Yes. You do. Then this is a concern for you as well. It turned out that some very, very smart people have looked into it in depth, and their consensus, and it's across the board and it's very firm, is that electronic voting machine systems are not secure and they shouldn't be used. Electronic scanning systems, that's where we have a paper ballot that's then scanned into a machine, but you actually mark the ballot yourself on paper. Those are much better, but they still need to be verified via a random or a manual recount of a random sample, or we're not going to be secure in knowing that that's the right result. Now let me give you a little bit of background. I started looking into election fraud in 2012, so it's been 4 years now. Basically, I had a friend who was running for the state senate position in Sedgwick County back in 2012, and I was helping him with his campaign. And I was going to do a survey for him. I did do a survey for him, but I started reading about election statistics and survey statistics, and among other things, I got to looking at some of the articles on electronic voting machines and their results, and I thought, well, we use those. I'm going to go and see how they're doing. I'm a certified quality engineer. I have been for close to 30 years now. I got my certification in 1987. So I have a wealth of experience to draw on in terms of evaluating the process for making sure that the results are what you want, that you're getting good results out of your process. And so in December of 2012, I went downtown to the Sedgwick County Courthouse, and I talked to the people that work there. They were actually delighted to have me, by the way. The people that actually work in our courthouse, I want to emphasize this, our election officials have all uniformly struck me as very honest, very hardworking people. They're doing their best, and I don't have any concerns, and I don't want to denigrate the people that are doing this job. It's not an easy job, and they are doing their best. It's these electronic voting machines that I am concerned about more than anything else in our process. And part of it is also how we deal with it. Anyway, what I found out is with our voting machines, we have what's called a verified paper audit trail, voter verified paper audit trail. On the left-hand side of the machine, do you have that here? Do you have a paper trail at all?
No.
Not that I know.
Okay. If you don't have a paper trail, do your best to vote on paper via early voting or something. Because if you don't have a paper trail, we don't have anything to audit with. And that's a serious problem. But in Sedgwick County, we at least have these verified voter paper trails. It's like a long sheet. I've got a picture of it there so you get an idea of how big it is. But it's like 80 feet long. It's a huge thing. And as you vote, it records every keystroke. So it tells, even if you vote for somebody and then you go back and change your mind, it'll record all that. And the purpose of this paper trail is so that later on, if we want to, we can verify and audit these machines. But it's not an easy task. You'd have to essentially go through, for every machine in a polling place, you'd have to go through every roll of paper they used individually and ascertain how that person voted. And in fact, it's never done. So it's not much use really having a paper trail if nobody ever looks at it. Okay? But this is the only physical record of the choices that are selected. And there's no record that identifies a particular voter with the machine that they voted on, much less a particular ballot in that trail. So really, we ought to be able to look at this. And that's what I sued to get access to, are these rolls of paper tape that record the actual voter intent at the time the voter made it. And that's what I've been denied access to in my lawsuit against Sedgwick County Election Commissioner, because they say, no, those are not meant to be audited. There's just a way for you to check that the machine got your vote recorded properly, but they're not meant for anybody else to check the voting machine results, and they don't. This bothers me. As a quality assurance person, I know very well that if nobody ever checks the output, we don't know that the output is right. So audits only help if they happen, and while Sedgwick County is nominally better off than like Johnson County or apparently Cali County if you don't have the paper trails, we're not really any better off if we never actually use those paper trails and do an audit of our results to make sure that those machines have performed properly. And Sedgwick County never does this. When our ballots are never counted transparently and publicly, we've got no reason to believe that the reported results are right. Even if we believe our election officials are honest, and I do believe that, I think they are honest for the most part, if they're not checking, they don't know that what they're reporting is right. If nobody ever verifies that paper trail from the machines, we have no reason to believe they're correct. In addition, even if they do have audits, they're only going to be helpful if they're transparent and they're conducted properly. Now, Chris Kobach did propose legislation this year requiring audits, but his proposal was so severely flawed I couldn't support it because he built into it requirements that would allow whoever was in his position to undermine the audit, to fix things if they wanted to. And I'm particularly concerned about this since April. The Chicago Board of Elections, the one in Cook County, which is in Chicago, conducted as required by their laws a 5% audit of all of the votes cast on the machines. However, they had, and this audit is supposed to be done in a public way with public observers being allowed in and to check that they're doing it right. But on April 5th, the Board of Elections met, and a citizens group who had observers there at the audit presented evidence, and their evidence was that the audit was not an audit, that it was a farce. And this was very disturbing, and I don't know if you caught this, there were people who testified that they were altering the results, other people who testified they weren't allowed to look at the results. It was not an audit, it was just a show, a farce to look like they were observing the letter of the law, but then in fact were not. And even more disturbing to me than the fact that this happened was the reaction of the Board of Elections, which was pretty much, thank you for your input, please sit down now. Let's see. So citizens groups are forming, and in Kansas, I formed the Show Me the Votes Foundation, and I've been putting together, I'm working on putting together exit polls for the general election in November. Illinois, the Citizens for Ballot Integrity put together volunteers. They observed the manual audit. They have filed suit about this audit of the primary results in an effort to bring some integrity to the system. Don't know what the result of that would be about. Arizona, they filed suit. In Michigan, there's a person by the name of Pat Foster who's verifying voter. There are various Facebook groups. But people are starting to become aware that this is a serious problem. And the news media has even more recently picked up on it, what with the news of the fact that I guess Donald Trump and the Russian government seem to be in cahoots about doing things. Anyway, suddenly people are waking up to the fact that not only could these machines be manipulated by partisan individuals in our country, but there's nothing to prevent people from other countries from trying to affect our voting results. This is a chart, and I want to take a little time to explain about this chart because this is the type of analysis that's becoming very commonly used with voting analysis, because it's voting data is very what we call noisy. There's a lot of variability in it. From one precinct to the next, you have different numbers of people who are registered Democrats and registered Republicans. that a lot of differences. So you have a lot of what we call noisy data. It bounces up and down a lot. This particular technique is called a cumulative sum analysis. And what it does is it takes advantage of the fact that as our sample sizes get larger and larger, our sample mean is going to converge to the overall mean. And we have more and more confidence with a larger sample that we've got a correct result. So it's kind of built on that fact. But what we do is we order our data. In this case, it's precinct data. We order it in a particular sequence. And if we see a pattern resulting, if we see a trend upward or downward, that then tells us that the sequence we have ordered our data in has a statistically significant effect. Okay? And what's most interesting about this is for the Wisconsin 2014 governor race, and I've broken it down by the type of voting equipment that they used. The green line that goes across, those are paper ballots that are non-voting machines, okay? So that's our paper ballots, and that green line is all of the precincts that use paper ballots, and that's exactly the pattern that we expect to see if there's no relationship between the size of the precinct and the overall average results. So that green line is more or less what we expect to see when there's nothing to be concerned about. When we see an honest election, that's what we expect to see. All of the data is organized by the type of machinery. There's like Dominion and AccuVote. The none, it says Dominion Sequoia. That means that for the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, they often have different machinery for that. So the green line means paper votes with some sort of machinery for people with disabilities. That top red line, Dominion and Command Central, it gives the specifics. But you can see it's got a definite trend. All of the red lines, you see a definite trend upward. That means that as the precincts that use that machinery got larger, they have a larger vote share towards the governor, the Republican governor who won that election. The purple line, I like to use that one because that is what we expect to see if there's a demographic reason for that increase. For example, as your precincts get larger, perhaps you get a larger share of Republican voters, that sort of thing. And you expect to see that in our data set. But you'll also notice that it flattens out. While you see an upward trend for a while, it then flattens out. So that's one where you go, maybe that's an indication of fraud, but that might be explained by other factors. So we're not real sure about that. The green is what we expect to see if there's nothing going on. And those red lines with those trending upward, that's what we would expect to see if people were manipulating our electronic voting machines. Now, I also want to emphasize here that when we do statistical analysis does not tell us causation. Statistical analysis says there's a pattern here, we have no explanation for it, and it fits with the hypothesis of voting machine manipulation. It does not prove voting machine manipulation. The only way you can prove that our voting machine results have been tabulated incorrectly is through an audit, which isn't done.
That was his recall election, I think.
That was his recall election, yes. And it was interesting. But I wanted to bring this up so that I'm going to show some more charts like this. When you see an upward trend, that's cause for suspicion, that's cause for investigation. When you see a flat line, that indicates that that's more or less what we expect to see. This is the Oklahoma Democratic primary. Now you recall Bernie won this, but if you look at that yellow line for Hillary's data, going up. I am personally at this point convinced that there was massive cheating going on in the Democratic primary. And this is why. There was a lot of debate about open versus closed primaries. There was the whole thing with the email hack that showed that they were biased against Bernie. But those things can be debated about whether or not they had an impact. This shows that this is basically evidence there was actual cheating going on. Although it didn't have an impact in Oklahoma. This is the Oklahoma primary for the Republican. This is kind of interesting too, isn't it? You can see that Cruz and Trump are both losing votes. Trump at a much greater rate than Cruz. Rubio's gaining. And Kasich is pretty much flat across the board. Nothing much is happening with him. So this is indication that our voting system is not producing accurate counts unless we can find some other explanation for why those preferences change with the size of the precinct. And at this point, we don't really have that. Oklahoma, interestingly enough, they're not near as big a change. Oklahoma, I have heard, I haven't verified this, but I recently heard that they write their own software for their voting machines. They use paper ballots that are scanned, and they write their own software, so they're less easy to alter. This is the Louisiana Democratic presidential primary. It was one of the most egregious. Louisiana votes on electronic voting machines without a paper trail. And you can see that you see the same pattern even with the paper ballots. Those dotted lines at the top and the bottom, that was the early ballots. So those tend to be a lot of times the paper ballot that people mail in, but we're still seeing that trend that's, it's very disturbing to me. As a statistician, I look at that and I think something is going on there and we need to find out what's going on and fix it. This was the Republican primary in Louisiana. Similar results. In this case, Cruz is actually going up while Trump is going down. Now, one of the interesting things about this is it also shows that while we have reason to be suspicious of those voting machines, they're not enough to necessarily alter the results of the election. In some cases, it's such a big difference that it's not going to make a change. Although with the Democratic primary, since all of their delegate votes were awarded proportionally, it would have made a difference in every state where it occurred. But with the Republicans, it was a little less of a deal. But you can see the bottom lines, they're not seeing a lot of changes there, but it's mainly the Trump versus Cruz. And at the time, the Republican establishment kept switching which candidate they were behind. This is different states at the same time, and I wanted to show this to show the difference between having paper records versus not having paper records. The green lines are all places where they use no DRE machines. They're only using paper ballots. Paper ballots are scanned by a computer. There's still opportunity for malfeasance there, but it's not as easily accomplished, and it can be verified by doing manual checks, hand counting those paper ballots. The red lines are all where we have no paper records. And this is all, I believe these are all percent of the Republican vote, yeah. So you can see that where we have no paper records, the Republicans were doing consistently better than at the beginning. The green lines, not so much. Now, I think one of the green lines where you see a definite downward trend is New Jersey Senate. Yes, that was correct. The New Jersey Senate. New Jersey is a Democratic state. I would be suspicious of that because of the long downward trend and because of the fact that New Jersey is essentially, for the most part, run by Democrats. I don't think this is a partisan thing at all. My research so far tends to show that Republicans benefit the most, but they are by no means the only beneficiaries. And if you look at it compared to who's running the electoral machinery in the state, that does correlate. This is Kansas. This is our 2014 Senate race. Remember Pat Roberts versus Greg Orman. Very, very close. Surprise when Pat Roberts, a lot of people were very surprised when they woke up Wednesday morning to discover Pat Roberts was still our senator. So this is cumulative vote count. Western counties using paper ballots and Western counties using DRE machines. The DRE is a direct record electronic. That's our voting machinery. And you can see they're about the same, and that you see that long kind of a slope downward. That's also to be expected as larger communities tend to be more registered Democrats. So we generally expect a little bit of a slope and then it to flatten out, and that's exactly what we see there. So for the most part, Western Kansas is we're seeing essentially exactly what we want to see, or would expect to see if everything's above board. On the other hand, when we add in Douglas County and Johnson County, where they're using DRE machines, and again, this isn't a real obvious upslope, but it is an upslope, and it is a statistically significant upslope on those two counties. Douglas County, Douglas is the green line, and that's fairly flat. They use paper ballots there that are scanned. Johnson County uses DRE machines with no paper trail. And this is essentially our area of the state. Okay? The green line is the surrounding rural area. That would include Cali County, I think, except that use DRE machines. So the green line would include Cali County, whereas the purple line is the city of Wichita. It's not even all of Sedgwick County, it's only the city of Wichita. The surrounding area that's not part of the city limits is included in the green line. And you can see the green line looks pretty good for the most part. We're seeing not too much to worry about. On the other hand, city of Wichita, I'm running exit polls because I am concerned about that. This is the Kansas 2014 general election results. This is Wichita only. So this is only Wichita. Attorney General is the top purple line, and you can see he never drops below 50%, so feel fairly confident about him. But then we get to Chris Kobach as the red line, and then the blue line is the Senate, and the green line is the governor. But in all of these cases, you see we've got this sharp trend going upward. We should not see that. That's an indication that we have something going on we need to investigate. In particular, I want to investigate because this is what we would expect to see if our voting machine results were being manipulated. This is the pattern we would expect to see. We need to investigate and audit to make sure that's not going on, or find out if it is and correct it. The bottom line here across the bottom, a lot of people who don't want to accept that we might have problems with our electoral equipment tell me, well, what about demographics? Isn't that going to be affecting it? And it does. And in fact, you can explain part of it with demographics. But that blue line is the share of registered Republicans using the same model. We do not see the same pattern there. Demographics in regards to how many registered Republicans we have, that sort of thing, that is not enough to explain the statistical anomalies we see in the data. That's why I'm concerned. That's why I'm trying to get things changed, is I do not have confidence that our results are being recorded correctly. Now, just last week, I ran an exit poll in Sedgwick County at a single polling location. Single polling location is not going to be enough to really tell us a whole lot. I mainly did this as a way to understand what's involved in setting up and running an exit poll. And I was really pleased with how that came out. Not that there weren't a few bumps, but for the most part things went smoothly, and I feel very confident going forward that we can set up several sites and run a really good exit poll in November. And if y'all are interested in doing that here, I would highly recommend it, and I'd be more than willing to help you get that set up. But these were the results. We had 134 Democratic votes recorded, 93 from our exit poll. We had 269 Republican votes recorded, 156 from our exit poll. I did have one of the mistakes I made in setting up our exit poll is I put both Democratic and Republican races on the same form, so we only had one form. I had quite a few people fill out both races, Democrat and Republican, and those just had to be tossed. So that's, if I had not done that, if I had set that up a little bit differently, we probably would have had response rates closer to 80%. So I was really very pleased with that. Paper ballots that were scanned. Some people in Sedgwick County, I don't know what the law is in Cowley County. In Sedgwick County, if you do not want to vote on a machine, you may request a paper ballot and they are required to get you one. But that's not the case across the state, so I don't know what that situation is here in Cowley.
No, they will. They will print them. They will provide.
They will provide them.
Ballot. Yeah.
I highly recommend voting on a paper ballot, because that's your paper trail. That's the ability to go back and have somebody look at that and make sure that your vote was counted correctly. For provisionals, we had one provisional ballot, and they had one provisional ballot. We had two people who completed our exit poll and said it was provisional. Actually, we had three, but the third person also filled in Democrat and Republican primaries. But at any rate, I'm not too concerned about that particular discrepancy, because I think that's more likely somebody marked the wrong thing when they said whether they voted by machine or paper or provisional than that. So I'm willing to give them that. And we had 4 that they didn't mark it at all. Now, I did include their results in our final results, but overall I was really very pleased with how the exit poll went and our responses. We talked about 6 different races, 3 Dem and 3 Republican. And one of the other mistakes, I don't really want to call this a mistake because I knew this going in, but the last 3 races, Kansas Senate District 30, District 16, and District 87, were not everybody that was at that polling location was a legitimate voter for those things. So if there were a number of, because there were enough people that made mistakes, that I'm a little bit, I basically take those last 3 and call them questionable, because people could have marked responses when they didn't actually get to vote for those races. So I considered those questionable. And this was the probability of getting the results that we got if given the results that were the official results. So we take the official results that were cast by machine, I compare them to our exit poll percentages, and I do a computation of how likely that is to occur by random chance to get that big a deviation. And I only gave 2 yellow ratings, one of which was the questionable area, and the other one was for the U.S. Senate, and I was very pleased with this. I was not looking for exposing election fraud. It was interesting. I had a conversation with one of the volunteers who was, "Oh, I hope we find it." I'm like, "No, I'm hoping we don't." Among other things, I really don't expect to see manipulation going on in these primaries for the most part. I'm hoping that they're not. And the other thing is the reason I'm doing this, I want to set this up as a way to compare to our results in the general election in November. So I want to be able to assume there's nothing going on. These are legitimate results. This is going to be our control, essentially. So I want to have confidence that it's a reasonable control, and I do feel that way. And just to give you an idea on, these are our questionable results. And it was one on the far end, the strike patterns. That's our exit poll vote share. Okay? Both for the machine and for the total exit poll. I didn't have enough, with only 25 votes cast by paper, that wasn't really enough to know anything. So I did not do a comparison for paper alone. I did do a comparison for the voting machines, and I did a comparison for the total polling location. And essentially what you see with District 30 is, even though that's kind of a big bump there, that's not a concern. For District 16, you can see they're very close. Again, that's within our statistical error that we would expect. So these first two are both in our statistical error category. I look at those and I say, those look good. We have no reason to be suspicious about those results. They could easily have occurred just through random chance. This third one, the Kansas Representative District 87, this was my one of my yellow rankings. If this had been better data, if I hadn't felt the data itself was questionable, I would have given this a red. But because we had questionable data, I did not feel comfortable making this a red alert. This is a yellow warning system saying, this is looking suspicious. This we might want to do more investigation into, except for the fact that the guy who benefited from this, Mr. Alessi, he lost the election anyway. So it wasn't really an issue in terms of changing the outcome. But that's the kind of a change that I look at statistically and say, yeah, that's pretty suspicious. But because I have questionable data, I can say it might be suspicious, but it might be due to the fact that I didn't really set that up to the best way. I'm not sure what to do in November. For the most part, I will ask questions that are races that are going to be on the ballot for everyone. But I also know that there are some people who will be interested in races that are not going to have that ability. And this at least gives us a clue as to what kind of deviations we can expect when we have that questionable data. These were the results we had good data for, because everybody who voted at that polling location would have voted on all of these races, U.S. Senator and U.S. Representative, 4th District. These were I used the losers in this case, because I think losers deserve some attention too. Monique Singh is the one that I rated a yellow. Basically, this is about the same kind of change that we saw with the previous one on the first, on the left-hand side. But this had enough votes cast that this becomes a statistically significant difference. But it's not, it was at the 3% level, basically. 3% chance of getting these results by random chance. And because we were doing a lot of comparisons, and again, because Monique Singh lost the election, so even though she may have benefited from the machine results, it didn't actually change the outcome of the election at all. So again, I gave that a yellow ranking. And then the U.S. Senate for the Republican Party and the U.S. Representative for the Democratic Party, those are both easily inside of our expected error rates. So no problems there. So I'm really very pleased overall with how the primary election poll went. A couple of races with a little bit of I might want to look a little closer at that if we felt it necessary, if the election had been contested or something like that. But overall, I'm left with a very good feeling about our primary results, at least in the city of Wichita, that our machines were functioning fairly well and that we had no real issues, at least at my polling station where I conducted this survey that anything happened. Now this concludes the slides that I was going to go through, and I'm happy to stay here and answer questions for you.
Bring this microphone out, so whoever else has. If you would come up here, we want everyone to be able to hear your question, and this seems to be the easiest way to speak into the microphone. It is already hot, so just come up, don't be shy. How many times do you get this opportunity? Okay. So,
Tracy, I'm in the front row. I'm going to ask the first question. I mean, the obvious questions stemming from this are, number one, how are these machines being manipulated? And number two, who do we
Those are
think is
these
responsible?
machines. How they're manipulated is, that's not my area of expertise because I'm analyzing the data. My understanding from reading a number of reports is that their security is what we would call leaky. There are a lot of points of vulnerability. Everything from slipping a card or some sort of, they don't use cards or jump drives. These are older machines. They have what's called, I think, a PV. Anyway, they have a small, like a cassette tape or something you put into them. But because you can essentially, apparently they can inject a virus into one, and then they slip that into one machine, and then as the official cassettes that they use are moved around from one machine to another, it can affect multiple machines. One thing that I do want to talk about with the verified voting, the voter verified paper trail, if the machines are not recording your vote correctly, and there have been actually quite a lot of reports of that, of people hitting one button and having it actually cast the vote for another, and then they go back and they try to fix it. If people don't notice that it didn't write down their vote, then no audit would ever catch that, which is why I prefer voter-marked paper ballots. As for who is behind it, I don't know. Again, statistical analysis only tells us that it looks like there's a problem going on across the country in a lot of different states. It seems to be really concentrated in areas where there are no paper trails, which means there's no way to actually verify our votes at all, which I personally have real problems with just by itself. But there's no way of knowing who's behind it, and there's no reason to assume that it's any of our state officials that are handling the system. It could be people that work at the company, it could be hackers. It's possible to get in and alter that software in a lot of different places, and because the software is never inspected, it's proprietary, we're not allowed to see it, not even our election officials are allowed to see it, assuming they have the expertise to recognize a problem if they were to see it. They actually put the software itself in some sort of a escrow situation so that if the company goes under, somebody else can get access to it, but we're not currently allowed to look at the software. So it could be generated by somebody working within the company, it doesn't even have to be an official company thing, it could be somebody who's just in the right position and is willing to accept bribes or has a really strong feeling about things. Hackers can get in and take care of it because we check our machines, we only check them prior to the election to make sure they're functioning properly, which I will grant our machines are perfectly capable of doing a good job, but we never check to make sure that they actually did do the job right, and that's a real problem. So because we're not verifying it, there's no way of knowing where in the process things are getting askew, if indeed things are becoming askew.
Yes, on the last election, we noticed in my race and several others,
Yeah.
especially in statewide races, that Democrats were winning early in the evening, and then later, when the larger precincts came in, they trended very much Republican. And, you know, have you found that to be true when looking at different?
It's certainly the case that that happens a lot, and it's also the case, and I don't know about this because, again, this gets out of my area of expertise, and I'm relying on reports I've read that other people put together. It's not uncommon for places to experience some sort of a computer shutdown or problem at the point at which all of the data is being collated and pulled together. And my own personal opinion is that I think that's where things are becoming, that we're injecting some sort of problems, or people are able to inject and into the system and manipulate those votes. Because if they do it at that point in the system, there's no way of verifying that that's happened. But yeah, and the fact that the larger districts, which tend to be in the more heavily Democratic areas, suddenly showed up with huge Republican, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
And I had a concern about possibly an algorithm in the counting machines.
Yes.
Because, as you said, the software is proprietary and no one
Yeah, and I'm actually as much concerned about that as I am the actual voting machines themselves, because we do have the paper trails for the voting machines, so presumably we could audit those. Do you know we never get, at least in Sedgwick County, we do not get a record of how many votes, of how the votes were cast on each machine individually? The only way to do an audit, which is what I've been trying to do, is to get all of the paper trails for all of the machines in a voting location, which is, you know, anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen or so. And you have to do all of them together and then separate all of the votes out by the different precincts. So it's a huge and time-consuming task to do an audit, and it's much harder than it would have to be with very simple software changes. But they don't give it to us by machine.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking your time to come speak to us. It's a pretty interesting presentation.
Well, thank you.
My perception is that you've been kind of met with a pushback on your findings, and then all of us that grew up with, you know, pretty high values that we learned in Boy Scouts and whatnot, we would have thought and anticipated you would have been embraced. So are you being embraced? And does Kurt Kobach say, well, yeah, you know, we're worried about registering people. We ought to be sure that if we go through that drill, we also...
I was actually kind of shocked too. In 2012, because I went in and I looked at it and I said, you guys aren't doing any post-election audits? This is, you know, will you let me do a post-election audit? Because as I said, you look into it and you go, oh, an audit's going to be a major headache. It's going to be a lot of time. And I was basically thought, well, why don't you let me, I can, you know, come in one afternoon a week for 6 months or something. I was willing to do that and go through those by hand. But their reaction to that was basically, no, you're not allowed to see those ballots ever.
Are there any states that you're aware of that are best in class that don't have these anomalies? And are there other Beths? And does the Federal Election Commission at least embrace your passion for getting it right?
Okay, let me take those, try to take those in order. Are there other states that are better? Absolutely. New Mexico does a very good job. Their auditing system is excellent. They have one type of machine across the whole state. So it's basically a statewide function. It's all paper, paper ballots. And they have a very well-developed auditing procedure to make sure that the results are correct. And you see very few problems or very few anomalies there in New Mexico. Okay. Are there other Beths? Absolutely. There's a woman in Colorado who managed to get all of the electronic voting machines thrown out there. She was very successful in that regard, but it took her several years. There's a woman in New Hampshire who's been suing, but she does not have a pro bono lawyer and has had no success at all in getting anything done in her area. And there's a group in Chicago that's there trying to make sure their audits are doing right stuff. There are citizens groups that are coming up all around the country, I think primarily in response to the fact that they're looking at, how did we get this government doing the stuff they're doing? And they go, oh, our voting machines seem to be a problem. So yes, there are other places that are doing things and trying to get changes made. And finally, what was that last question again?
On a federal level, are there?
Oh, the Federal Election Commission. That seems to be a completely dead thing. I saw a video about the person who's in charge of the Federal Election Commission who basically said, we can't get anything done. It's a bipartisan committee with like 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and they can't agree on anything. Much like the rest of Washington.
I'm going to go drive my car off a cliff when I leave.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I totally understand that. My son just turned 17, and I started talking to him about getting registered to vote, and he's like, and why should I bother, Mom? And I don't have a good answer for him.
Okay.
So, go ahead, sir.
I'm thinking back on that chart that showed Wichita, the Attorney General's race, Secretary of State, and the Governor.
Yes. I mean,
What are the odds that those trend lines would follow each other almost exactly? Even if everybody voted a straight ticket, it doesn't seem to me like they should track that closely.
actually, I'm not as concerned about that because here, this is the one, right? Yeah.
That was common.
No, that's Wisconsin. That, that's a really good question. I'm not as concerned about that because we are ordering the precincts in essentially the same order, but it does seem unusually close in terms of all the little bumps and everything. I have not been able to figure out a statistical test for that to tell whether or not that's something we should expect. But they're not independent lines because they're all the same precincts in the same order, or very close to the same order. I don't think they're quite exactly with each one, but yeah, it's a good question, and I'm sorry I don't have a good answer to that. It's not anything I can say definitively, yes, that's a problem, or no, that's what we would expect, other than that because they're not independent, we would expect them to see at least some correlation. But yeah, I have to agree, it does seem odd.
Is there any way you could look at other communities or whatever, other studies, and see how many times you come up with 3 races that follow exactly?
It would probably be possible. I haven't had the time to look into that myself. I have a day job that this is not a part of, so I'm kind of limited in how much time I can spend on it. But thank you, it's a very good question.
Okay, anyone else with a question? Okay, Tracy,
Go ahead.
go for 2, yeah.
With this cumulative sum test, is there any other test to sort of compare and see if you can use a different statistical analysis method and come up with the same?
Actually, yes, there are. This one is really nice. I like it because essentially what it does is it takes noisy data that's hard to see a pattern in, and it really pulls those hidden patterns out and shows you that, yes, this is a pattern, it's not a random fluctuation. There are other tests, for example, with the primaries this year, the presidential primaries. I don't know if you've seen any of the headlines about the results regarding exit polls versus the actual official results. That's a completely independent kind of test. So the fact that our exit polls have been consistently wrong in a particular direction, and that the largest deviations from the exit polls and the official results occurred in places without any paper trails is very highly suspicious, and that's a completely different analysis that says, yeah, we need to really look at this and say, is this an honest election? At this point, I don't feel like the Democratic primary was an honest election. I really don't. Although it was in Kansas because we had caucuses. Caucuses are much harder to cheat.
Yes, I was wondering, you have a lawsuit filed?
I have filed a lawsuit against, originally it was against Chris Kobach and Tabitha Lehman. Chris Kobach has been dropped because he says Tabitha Lehman gets to make that call, even though he told her what call to make.
Okay, do you have a pro bono attorney?
I have a pro bono attorney, and
What is the status?
the status is they moved to have it dismissed because in 2013 I sued on a different, basically I sued Tabitha Lehman to get access to those same tapes under, for a different election, and I lost. I didn't have a lawyer for that one. In 2014, right after the election, I filed for a recount, which any citizen is allowed to do on ballot questions, not on races. Only candidates can file for races. But I did request a recount for the ballots questions, that there were 4 on Sedgwick County ballots, and I was denied access to those records. And I should not have been denied access to the records. The judge even said that, but he also said that he wasn't going to let me have access to them because I'd sued in 2013 and lost. I don't really understand the law, but now I have a lawyer and he's appealed that decision and it's currently under appeal, so that's where it stands right now.
Thank you.
I have a question about the voting machines.
Yes.
Are there a number of companies that make them?
There are a few. There's more than one, but there's not a whole lot, maybe half a dozen.
And in all states, do they use the same machine in all states across the whole state? Or
No. It depends. In New Mexico, as I just talked about, they use one type of machine across the state. However, in Kansas, each county is allowed to select what machinery they want. And most states are more like that, which is why I had the Wisconsin divided by different machinery types. Most places, voting is done, it's very much under the control of our county officials, which it is here in Kansas.
After hearing what you've said, it makes one think, what is the purpose of a vote in the first place if they aren't really counting them as they should be counted? What makes one suspect?
It makes it very difficult. As I said, I'm trying to explain to my son why it's important that he register to vote when he turns 18 next year, and he's saying, "Mom, how can you say that?" And I don't have a good answer for him other than I think it's very important that we not only vote, but that our votes be counted correctly, and that's why I'm working to do this. I think if our votes aren't counted correctly, we don't have democracy.
Well, I'm of the Chicago version, vote early, vote often, and probably would take care of some of that.
Okay.
So you seem to be a one-woman person fighting this battle. What can we do?
Well, what you can do, first of all, ask for a paper ballot when you vote. Vote early if you have to get a paper ballot, but ask for a paper ballot. Don't vote on machines. And the second thing you can do is try to put together an exit poll and make sure that the results, the official reported results, are reasonable according to your exit poll results. And provide a check. Essentially, I look at what's happening with our voting systems, and in the end, I think it's on us as citizens to demand that our votes be counted correctly. That if we're not willing to put in the time and effort, not just to vote, but also to make sure that our voting systems are honest and accurate, then we are deserving of what we get.
It seems like we should have a law in Kansas requiring some kind of auditing. What would that look like? What should we be pushing for as far as changing the law?
And not that I'm against audits, because I do audits and I understand them, but like the voting machinery itself, which is software, which nobody who doesn't understand that can know for certain for themselves that it's good. They have to depend on the judgment of experts. Audits have that same problem. There are ways to game audits, some obvious, some not so much, but my personal opinion is we should go to hand-counted paper ballots only. And that should be done transparently and publicly and with a secure chain of custody, because anything less means that people who don't have expertise have to rely on the experts to be honest and to do their jobs well. But anybody can look at counting of ballots. It's a very simple process, and they can know that their vote was tallied honestly. So, and I'm not 100% sure it would even be more expensive. It would take longer, certainly. The machines are very, very fast. But my own opinion at this point is that hand-counted paper ballots are the only way to bring transparency to all citizens. You don't have to be an expert in auditing or software to know that ballots are counted correctly if you can watch them being counted.
Can we introduce that in legislation, or?
You certainly, people could, people who understand how to introduce legislation could.
Ed could. You know, he's not, I think they've left.
Incidentally, I think like 8 out of 10 European countries have gone to completely hand-counted paper ballots. They've rejected the electronic equipment. I read that recently, so I don't know. I read it on the internet, so you know it's got to be right. What's your question?
Beth, how long has this been going on? I know that there's been quite a turn in the way that the Republicans and Democrats have gotten along, particularly since Obama has become president, and with all the introduction with the Tea Party and all that stuff. But has it always been this way, even before, when it was?
There have always been, I know I've read at least one person claim election rigging is all-American. It's certainly been the case that there are recorded instances of election rigging as long as there have been elections. But the electronic voting machines basically bring it to a whole new level that has never been seen before. And we had, basically in Sedgwick County, we got the machines we're using now in 2006, was the first election they were using it. And it's very interesting. I've been able to go back to the year 2000. I don't have the data with me or the charts with me. But you can see, that prior to 2006, you still see a very suspicious pattern. In fact, in some ways, it's more suspicious. But it's very different. In 2006, the machines come in, and it's a whole different pattern. So, and basically, those voting machines, those electronic voting machines that we use, particularly the ones without paper trail, have just allowed our democracy to be stolen from us.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, Nathan?
Would an adequate solution that wouldn't be quite as expensive as switching back to paper ballots? I know there's some machines that you vote and it prints out on the roll your vote, to have the voter themselves audit their
That has the same problem. Anytime you have electronic transmission of the data, where the data goes electronic, and you're basically losing transparency. You no longer know what's going on. You have to trust in the machines that they've done the right job. The ballot printing machines, which are fine as far as that goes, and they're really nice for people with disabilities. But that's not a problem in terms of that. I personally prefer the voter-marked paper ballots because it's less likely to make an error, but they're also easier to read if you have the machines print them out. And that's what we're going to be getting, by the way, next year in Sedgwick County, is we're going to be switching to machines that, two different types of machines, ones that print out the ballot, and the voter actually gets the ballot and can look it over and make sure it's correct, and then they put it into a machine that scans it and will record and count up those ballots. And the reason that isn't sufficient is because unless you have a really good auditing system, you still are open up to not being able to discover if the machine's been programmed properly and are giving you proper counts. So that's the issue with that. You can do the audits, but if you're not somebody who knows audits can be gamed, and most people aren't going to know how to tell that that's happened. In fact, even the people conducting the audit may not be able to tell that it's being gamed because it's being gamed at a different level. So that's why I've basically, it was the Chicago Board of Elections, and there are people standing up and saying, this was not an audit, this was not an audit, this was wrong, this was a joke. And I look at that and I think, boy, if that can happen in Chicago, and they had people and they basically hired people to do the audit and told them, okay, we want you to do this audit, and in the end it's supposed to match up to these numbers. Well, that's not an audit. So unless you have that expertise, you're dependent on the people who do have that expertise to tell you if something's wrong. And I don't think our voting should be that way. I think everybody ought to be able to vote and know it's been counted properly, and the only way to do that is with hand-counted paper ballots. But that's a good question, thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for listening to me, and remember to vote on a paper ballot.
Well, and we're going to take this just a little further, because we are going to talk to you, Beth, about doing some kind of an exit poll, something or other here in our area. So, with that in mind, we have a lot of very interested people sitting here, and some of them I know will want to be a part of that. So, we've got a couple of clipboards at the back. If you want to be a part of this project, make sure you give us your name, a phone number, and your email, and put a Y next to your name so we know that you are, at this point anyway, interested in doing something about our exit poll. And we'll work with Beth and create a plan. So there's 2 sheets. If you get to the end, turn it over and just start on the back, because we would like, since you're all here, all fired up, knowing something is very, very wrong going on, let's just use this as a springboard to doing something about it. I'm one for doing some things. I like action. I see problems. I want to do something about it. So yes, long term, we'll talk to New Mexico folks and find out how what they've got, and then we're going to work it through the system. I'm confident we can change this state, but it's going to be with you or a lot of other people, so let's just be part of the change that we want to see in this state. So we appreciate Beth very much. She's awesome. And we will probably get her back down here, because we're going to have some organizational meetings about this project. So we really appreciate you coming to visit. You might have really started something down here. Cowley County Women for Kansas has been kind of lighting some fires, and I'm all for it. I love fires, you know. It's time to turn up the heat in a lot of places. A couple of announcements for future events that you do want to consider. Women